Yo, what's up? Now, today we are going to be talking about this particular thing that I've picked up a few months ago, which is the Hiby R6 Gen 3 2025. Now, this thing retails for $399 US, and among all of the other DAPs that you can see in the market right now, I think as a first DAP, this is probably the best for your money's worth in terms of its price to value ratio. Now, just to be clear, I bought this myself, so no brands are paying me to say anything good or bad about it. But honestly, I have very good experiences with this thing so far, with a very few caveats of what this thing claims to be able to do, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, for the average viewer here, which is also an audio enthusiast, you'll probably have asked yourself at one point in life, should you ever upgrade yourself from just using dongle decks? And personally, I have asked that for quite some time, and after upgrading, it has definitely helped me in a lot of ways, specifically in my lifestyle. Because first of all, having this means that I can have complete separation from my phone. The second reason is also this thing can do offline files. Now, not to say my iPhone can't, but again, I used the iPhone 11 back then and my space is very limited, so I cannot import a lot of stuff into my phone. And also with the fact that I have DSD files, iPhone does not support that. This thing supports that, so and the third most important thing as well is the fact that I want something that is a little bit more reliable in the sonic property side to evaluate IEMs. Quite obvious, I'm doing audio reviews at this point, which if you aren't subscribed yet, please subscribe. It really helps the channel. And just comment after you watch this video. How is it? Is the framing good? Is the sequence good? The script good? Let's talk down below. But with that aside, continuing on with this, I definitely need something that is a little bit more reliable to test every single plethora of IEMs that I can get my hands on. Definitely the Kensei, the M15, both of those are very amazing in its own aspects, but occasionally I feel like it's a little bit overkill. Sometimes when you have that event where you're using a $10 IEM and you're putting a $500 DAC onto it and it sounds hella amazing, but at the same time, you're probably listening more to the DAC amp rather than the IEM. And I've tested that on a lot of budget IEMs, and honestly, it sounds very weird because I've never expected a very simple KZ to sound so amazing, only to be known with the fact that, I'm pushing it with a 2.5K MYR dongle DAC. This, in my opinion, which by the way is rocking a quad-core CS43198 from Cirrus Logic chipset, is probably more transparent and more within the realms for me to use it. I specifically need to mention it's 2025 because the 2024 version is rocking an ESS Saber DAC, which claims to be more airy and also more light occasionally. Overall, that thing sounds more clinical, but I would say it sounds a little bit too sterile for general enjoyment. This thing, although it still maintains its transparency, it has a little bit of a more musical prowess to it, which it's more better for general enjoyment. And personally, I really enjoyed using this so far. Yes, for the exact price, I could buy a very good dongle DAC that performs even more than what this thing is capable of sonically. But with a dongle DAC, you need a separate device to use it. And truth be told, I'm too lazy to use my phone and have another thing hanging out of it. And yeah, let's just segue back to use case isolation for my phone. I mainly now listen to a lot of IEMs when I'm sleeping. So if I want to sleep and I want to charge my phone at the same time, that is not possible. And at the same time, I have no self-control. Sometimes when I'm sleeping, my phone vibrates and I decide to doom scroll Instagram. I start to doom scroll all the social media that I have, and it is 2 a.m. in the morning. And I have work tomorrow at 9 a.m. and I need to wake up at 6:30, so you get what I mean. Having this completely isolates myself from everything else, so one of the best purchases ever, specifically to help me to sleep. But yeah, going back to how this thing sounds, I personally feel like this is probably the best that you can get in terms of sound for the price point with a DAP. And with its baked in EQ, again, I feel like this is probably the biggest factor as to why the Hiby R6 Gen 3 is the best first DAP for everybody. First step for everybody, because I forgot to finish my sentence, is the fact that this thing with the PEQ and the MSEB, you can literally customize all of the slight nuances that you wish this thing had to this thing has. Let's say I feel like this thing is a little bit low on the sub bass end. I'm just gonna push everything up, and here it is. I have more on the low end. Let's say I want some slight more crispiness or airiness in here. On the high end, I'm just gonna push it up. So this is a very versatile DAC, so that everybody can tune it to their personal preference. There's also even cases where people used to compare this to the iBasso DX180, that being even more expensive. They can tune out the same type of sound signature on the Hiby R6, which is amazing from what I could hear. So yeah, extremely versatile, and that's why I personally say that this is probably the best app for anyone. You can customize anything that you want on it. And I'm just gonna let pre-edit me talk about the MSEB. Now there's two EQs baked into this. The first one is your industry standard parametric equalizer, the PEQ, and this thing has 10 bands and you can literally just do whatever you want with it. But just to share a little bit, mainly we only need 3 to 4 bands and that's it. You don't really need more than that. And should you say you don't want to, go through the learning curve of how to use PEQ, Hiby gets you covered, because Hiby has another EQ called the MSEB, Mage Sound 8-Ball. Now this thing, to put it simply, is the most simplified version as to how you could EQ everything, because everything is done in text and it's very easy to understand. So let's say if, overall this thing sounds a little bit warmish, you want it to be even more neutral, shift it a little bit to the cool and the bright section. And should you say you want something that has faster bass texture, shift it to fast bass texture. It is very simple to use. And in terms of how does it sound on the EQ, you know how sometimes EQ doesn't sound right, it sounds a little bit artificial. Yeah, this one doesn't have that issue. For the PEQ, completely none. For the MSEB, I'm just gonna tell everybody, you're not gonna be pushing everything to its limits, but stay within 50 and everything will sound natural still. For me, I played around with this a little bit, and the most that I will go in terms of tweaking my sounds will be probably at 20 plus 30, nothing more than that. Probably one more thing I want to mention before moving on to the next topic, which is battery life. Now, this is probably the most important thing out of all, and definitely this thing has a very good battery life. This much of battery life, I'm just going to put the screenshot here. And personally, I use class AB balance, and personally, I charge this only once every 3 to 4 days, so I think it kind of adds up. Now, I forgot to give context that when I am using my Hiby and I only need to charge it once every few days, I'm using it mainly 90% of the time, actually 99% of the time, with pure audio mode. Because on Android mode, you might actually lose out a lot, or not a lot, but a significant amount of battery life by just letting it idle on Android mode. So turn pure audio mode on and you will save a lot of battery. Now, okay, we talked about everything good so far, but definitely there are some caveats that this particular DAC has. And one of the things that I personally want to talk to, which coincidentally I just showed, is the Class A and Class AB config. Now, although on the higher models, it is more obvious in terms of its sonic properties, on this in particular, sadly, I cannot really hear that much of a significant difference between the Class A and Class AB for me to keep switching and using it. Because the Class A also makes my phone, sorry, not my phone, but my dongle. The Class A also makes my Hiby DAP extremely warm, which I personally am not a fan of. And also it really drains out the battery a lot. And just an extra explanation for people, Class A basically means that no matter if you're playing the music or not, it will consistently output a specific amount of power. And for Class AB, it is a more efficient way to conserve energy and also to use energy. If you're pausing the music, no signal is going through, no energy will be wasted or being used. Only when you're playing things, they will consume energy. Now, the other thing that most people don't like about it is also with the fact that this thing has so-called more mid-tier specs in terms of the hardware as well as the firmware. Even though this thing only has a 720p display, even though this thing only runs on Snapdragon 665, personally I don't really find that to be that big of an issue, because just to put context into it, the Hiby R6 II Pro, which is twice the price of this, is also using 665. So you definitely don't need the best of the best to power this in terms of its CPU. As long as this thing works smoothly, I think everything is fine. But I definitely understand a lot of people's concern because, I paid this much money, at least give me the newest, the latest and greatest things. Okay, we've talked about everything. Now for the most important part. How does this thing actually sound if we're talking about the context of the DAC itself? Now, simply put, for this particular player, the Hiby R6 Gen 3 overall sounds more musical. It sounds quite transparent, although it occasionally has a neutral warm-ish tint to it, but mostly it only covers the low end to the mid frequencies. On the upper mids and up, I can't really feel like there's that much form of warmness to it, rather than, you know, it is more refined. But yeah, basically, again, in the context where I need to review more IEMs, this thing overall sounds more natural, it sounds more transparent, and you know, it has a very good amount of dynamics. And this in particular, in comparison to the Saber DAC version, is that most people complain that thing has too much of a lighter characteristic. This thing overall, in terms of the bass part, is overall more fuller, it has more note weight to it, and also gives you better dynamics. Now, vocals overall on the R6 III is also on the natural side. Everything sounds quite good, quite well packaged, laid back, with an overall, again, good amount of body to it. Not extremely much, but just enough to not sound anemic. Now, when we're moving on to the instrument side, other than the usual things that I will keep repeating again and again, natural, transparent, energetic, but still has a laid-back feature so you don't sound too fatigued, is also the fact that this thing has very good airy overtones to it. But occasionally that might be misconstrued to be, you know, air when it's actually more dry. But you know, to each their own. I can hear both airiness and dryness at the same time. And among all of the different instruments that are being played through this, the two most prevalent ones that I can notice are strings and synths. Strings, let's say guitars, all of those stuff, overall gives you a more solid, a more rigid type of presentation, which I kind of like because it has that energeticness. And in terms of synths, digital synths will probably have the most advantage playing through this because everything just sounds extremely well articulated, like it was literally just played out of the synth patch. Now, upper mids and treble, in my personal opinion, is also done extremely well with this. So clear and crisp with kind of like a smooth ending to it, to whatever that is in this region. And also micro details as well in the upper mids are also very prevalent. They also shine very well, but does not do it too much. Now, moving on to how this thing handles technicalities. Dynamics, in my opinion, I feel like it's kind of solid across the board, but especially on low volumes, I feel like this thing really takes the cake because not a lot of things can do good on low volumes. This thing, even on 1, 2, 3, while I'm sleeping, I can hear everything extremely well, and you know, it really makes me feel like I am floating while I'm sleeping. Soundstage, although this is not the best, I feel like they have done it quite well still, so that I don't feel like it's congested in any way. Although not as wide, this thing gives enough reach. Now, imaging and separation overall is also quite accurate in the sense where even though it is not as wide, the depth gives it enough dimension so that it has a good enough way for you to separate every single thing. And last but not least, like I said, detail retrieval. This thing overall does it quite well, but specifically it involves more overtones being shining out in the mids and upper mids area. Not to say that macro details aren't good, but the most prevalent thing that I can notice is specific details in mids and upper mids, like things just kind of sparkle out here and there, but also being presented in a very humble way, not being